All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. Major story we're going to be covering today, something that's not getting as much media coverage as it should, but we are slowly walking into a regime change war in Venezuela against the Maduro regime, and it is entirely based off a pack of lies, as just about every war is. And we're going to get into that today. The entire U.S. government is engaged in one of the most blatant lies, or the most blatant series of lies, really, since WMDs in Iraq. It is just completely indefensible. And we're going to get into debunking these lies here today on the show. We're going to talk about what the future of this conflict seems to be trending in the direction of. And we'll discuss the lone dissident voice, really, which is Rand Paul, who is the only one who's acknowledging reality, seemingly, on this entire discussion. So we'll get into all this and more today on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve system.
Only America first.
End all of these wars. America is trying to play empire. We want everything released, and you're actively covering it up. It's not America first to be pushing our influence in areas where it shouldn't be. We're run by people that don't understand what they're doing and don't understand the ramifications of the policies they're enacting. That's an incredibly dangerous situation. All right, everybody, before we begin, I do want to say real quick, thank you guys so much for helping me hit the 100 subscriber mark here on YouTube. We hit that over the weekend just a couple days ago. So thank you guys so much. If you haven't subscribed yet, please feel free to hit subscribe right down below. It really helps me out a lot. And also hit like while you're down there as well. And also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and hitting follow on all those accounts as well, I'd really appreciate that. But let's get right into the news. All that's out of the way. The last month, roughly, I'm sure if anyone who's paying attention to foreign policy news or has been watching this show at all, you'd know that over the past month, the U.S. government has been really ratcheting up the propaganda machine in efforts to get the public support behind a regime change war against Maduro, who is the leader of Venezuela. For about the last decade, it's important to understand the context here, so we'll get into the context first, and then we'll get into what's going on right now and where we may end up in the future. But for context, for about the past decade, the United States government, and it really ratcheted up with the first Trump term, has had a maximum pressure campaign against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And this is largely because because Venezuela has major oil interests for the United States, and the United States wants to get those oil interests, among other things such as minerals, and really making sure that the minerals, the oil, is all directed in the interest of Washington. And the problem here is that in South America, there is right now this battle for influence amongst the great powers of the world, the United States and China mainly, as well as Russia to a lesser degree, but is mainly the United States and China are fighting for influence in this continent, in South America, amongst all these different countries. And Venezuela has been, under Maduro, very aligned with the Chinese government and the Russian government. And the United States government, specifically the first Trump term, has been very explicit in their wishes to make sure that Venezuela's oil interests and mineral interests are aligned with Washington, D.C.'s intentions, and not those of Beijing or Moscow. So, under the first Trump term, we had the maximum pressure campaign, which was basically heavy sanctions on Maduro, in the hopes that those sanctions would create enough instability within Venezuela to have Maduro naturally get ousted from power and have some sort of an uprising in Venezuela. And that campaign was largely thanks to John Bolton, who was at the time the national security advisor under Donald Trump. That didn't work, and Maduro has held power ever since. And now, as we fast forward here to the second Trump term now, starting in 2025, we've had a resuming of that maximum pressure campaign because of the influence of Marco Rubio this time in the Trump cabinet. He is currently the Secretary of State as well as the national security advisor. So Marco Rubio, and it's not unfair to say, he is the most powerful Secretary of State in modern history. I mean, he controls the State Department, as well as being the national security advisor after Mike Waltz got removed from that position. So Marco Rubio here has major sway in Republican circles in the Trump administration, and he's even being floated as a potential VP or presidential contender in 2028. So the Trump inner circle views him as one of the potential heirs to MAGA, to the America First movement. And Rubio now has major power in the White House. And the reports coming out are that Rubio is the one convincing Donald Trump, number one, that fentanyl is coming from Venezuela, which we'll get into in a second, but that is a complete lie. And number two, convincing him that Maduro, the best way to secure the oil interests of Venezuela and align them with America's interests is to overthrow Maduro. But so let's get into what's happened over the past month roughly, and we'll discuss why Rubio is a bad actor in all of this. Over roughly the past month, you've seen videos, I believe 10 at this point, drug boats are what the United States is calling them, who have been off the coast of Venezuela and have been bombed by the Trump administration. Now, these boats, they claim, were carrying drugs such as fentanyl to the United States. And they claim the members of people, they claim the people on these boats were members of gangs such as Tren de Aragua or other drug cartels. Now, keep in mind, they provided no evidence of this. They have not provided a name. They have not provided any evidence of that they were drug or gang affiliated. They have not provided any evidence that there was actually fentanyl or other drugs on those boats. They are just saying, trust us, is essentially what they are saying. Now, Rand Paul has been the lone voice on the Republican side, really, besides maybe Thomas Massie, but Rand Paul specifically has been at the forefront against these strikes. And just to understand where Rand Paul comes from, he is a libertarian-leaning conservative, and he is very much against foreign interventions, so naturally he is against this. And here is a clip from him on Fox News Sunday just yesterday explaining his stance on these strikes.
The land is going to be next, and we may go to the Senate, we may go to the Congress and tell them about it, but I can't imagine they'd have any problem with it. I think they're going to probably like it, except for the radical left lunatics.
All right, so I'll start with you, Senator Paul. What do you need to hear in a briefing? What questions do you have?
It's not so much about a briefing, but we haven't had a briefing. To be clear, we've got no information. I've been invited to no briefing. But a briefing is not enough to overcome the Constitution. The Constitution says that when you go to war, Congress has to vote on it. And during a war, then, there's a lower rules for engagement. People do sometimes get killed without due process. But the drug war or the crime war has typically been something we do through law enforcement. And so far, they have alleged that these people are drug dealers. No one said their name. No one said what evidence. No one said whether they're armed. And we've had no evidence presented. So at this point, I would call them extrajudicial killings. And this is akin to what China does, to Iran does with drug dealers. They summarily execute people without presenting evidence to the public. So it's wrong.
Now, another part of this broader story that the U.S. government is trying to tell here to justify these strikes is that Maduro is in some form the head of all these drug cartels. He's in cahoots with Tren de Aragua or MS-13 or any of these drug cartels / gangs. And they are saying that Maduro is orchestrating these gangs in a way to become somewhat of what they're calling a narco-terrorist. Now, that term is in many ways just intentionally put together of narco, like narcotics, terrorist, like two bad things. It's a propaganda term that has no real definition. So just at the outset, the term narco-terrorist is intentionally something that's meant to scare you. And it's largely a propaganda term. So they're claiming Maduro is at the head of this narco-terrorist ring of gangs that they claim are based out of Venezuela, producing drugs in Venezuela, and shipping drugs from Venezuela to the United States with the intention of killing Americans. And this is what the United States government, led by Trump, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, are claiming is happening right now and are using as a justification to blow these boats out of the water and now creep towards regime change against Maduro. Now, what Rand Paul points out here is that there's been no evidence provided of any of this. And actually, there is significant evidence to the contrary, which is where we come to this bombshell report out of Drop Site from just the other day. Ryan Grimm, an incredible journalist who is also on Breaking Points, he had a report with Sagar and Jetty that from a senior U.S. official that all the claims about fentanyl are just untrue. So we'll start quoting the article here. The article is from October 24th, and it's titled "Inside Rubio's Push for Regime Change in Venezuela." And we'll pull it up here. And it says, quote, U.S. intelligence has assessed that little to none of the fentanyl trafficked to the United States is being produced in Venezuela, despite recent claims from the Trump administration, a senior U.S. official directly familiar with the matter tells DropSite. The official noted that many of the boats targeted for strike by the Trump administration do not even have the requisite gasoline or motor capacity to reach U.S. waters, dramatically undercutting claims by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The claim is backed up by recent comments from Senator Rand Paul, who similarly noted that zero fentanyl is produced in Venezuela. Despite the lack of intelligence linking Venezuela with fentanyl production, the Trump administration has made alleged Venezuelan drug trafficking the casus belli in its drive to overthrow the government of Nicolas Maduro. On Thursday, President Donald Trump referred to possible ground action, claiming at a press conference that the, quote, sea drugs coming in are 5% of what they were a year ago. So now they're coming in by land. Land is going to be next, he said, indicating that he was willing to bypass congressional approval. On Friday, the U.S. announced it was sending an aircraft carrier to Latin America in a further escalation. Two sources familiar with discussions at the White House note that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a longtime proponent of regime change in Venezuela, has been the driving force behind the aggressive military and rhetorical posture towards the Maduro regime. Toward that end, Secretary Rubio, also in charge of the remnants of the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, has redirected millions of dollars in money previously allocated for pro-democracy measures in Venezuela and the surrounding countries, a thinly veiled effort in prep for a regime change war. So, to everyone out there who is celebrating the end of USAID, and justifiably so, because USAID has been used for bad all across the world and has been a terrible thing across the world. We're just sending U.S. taxpayer money all across the world for these stupid projects that never work out. For everybody celebrating that, everyone celebrating that needs to acknowledge right here, there's just that Secretary Rubio, who is now in charge of what was USAID, the money didn't disappear, and the money is still there, and Rubio is using the money that was formerly used for pro-democracy things across the world, which is just the remnants of a neocon foreign policy. He's using that money for the same exact purpose, but under a different name, in Venezuela. And we also have the news that, number one, Trump has greenlit CIA covert operations in Venezuela to try and weaken the regime. So the CIA is on the ground in Venezuela. And he's also saying he's willing to strike on the land in Venezuela, and they've talked about striking in Latin America. They've talked about striking in Mexico. So this has become an all-out war, or at least it seems as if it's going to become an all-out war in Latin America and South America. So this escalated very quickly, and it's largely thanks to Marco Rubio, because Rubio has for years, and you can go back and watch Rubio over the course of his career in the Senate, he's for years been one of the hawkish people in the Senate against the Maduro regime. And you see hawks today, like Lindsey Graham, or it was yesterday, Lindsey Graham on TV celebrating this, saying, like, basically salivating over the fact that another war has started. And I do just want to pause on that point. Our federal government is so hungry for a war that just as we possibly see peace blossoming in the Middle East, again, I say possibly because I don't believe this is anywhere near over, but just as we possibly see a war dying down in the Middle East, in Gaza, we are just all in the federal government searching for the next possible war. You have Lindsey Graham, who just advocates for war after war after war. This man is is against peace, just flat out against peace. And we are suddenly listening to people like him. It's just madness right now in the federal government. It's absolute madness in foreign policy. So that is the latest on Rubio. And this is even worse. I'm going to get into this now. This was a development from a couple weeks back, about 3 weeks back, that was just recently brought to light from the New York Times. But as I said before, the main concern with Nicolas Maduro that the United States government tangibly has is that they want the oil interests from Venezuela to be aligned with the wishes of Washington, D.C., and not the wishes of Beijing and Moscow. So, knowing this, and knowing that the United States government is very likely going to push for regime change against him, Maduro actually made an offer to the United States. And I'm going to start here. This is the offer that Maduro made. This is from the New York Times, titled, "Venezuela's Maduro offered the U.S. his nation's riches to avoid conflict." This is from a couple weeks back. He offered the United States everything, and Trump admitted this. and we'll start quoting the article, quote, Venezuelan officials, hoping to end their country's clash with the United States, offered the Trump administration a dominant stake in Venezuela's oil and other mineral wealth in discussions that lasted for months, according to multiple people close to the talks. The far-reaching offer remained on the table as the Trump administration called the government of President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela a, quote, narco-terrorist cartel, amassed warships in the Caribbean, and began blowing up boats that American officials say were carrying drugs from Venezuela. Under a deal discussed between a senior U.S. official and Mr. Maduro's top aides, the Venezuelan strongman offered to open up all existing and future oil and gold projects to American companies, give preferential contracts to American businesses, reverse the flow of Venezuelan oil exports from China to the U.S., and slash his country's energy and mining contracts with Chinese, Iranian, and Russian firms. The Trump administration ended up rebuffing Mr. Maduro's economic concessions and cutting off diplomacy with Venezuela last week. The move effectively killed the deal, at least for now, the people close to the discussions say. So there was a deal on the table for everything. For the oil, for the gold, for U.S. business interests, and even to cut off most of the ties with China and Russia and Iran. But we said no. And you know who said no? According to the leaks, Marco Rubio was the one who ordered that deal to be slashed, to be cut. Marco Rubio, because he is so hungry for regime change war and has been for his entire career, said no, we don't want that deal. We don't want everything. And when a reporter asked Trump if it was true that Maduro offered everything, Trump literally said, yes, that is true. He said, yes, Maduro offered everything.
Mr. President, it has been reported that Maduro offered everything in his country, all the natural resources. He even recorded a message to you in English recently, offering mediation. What should we do in order to stop that?
He has offered everything. He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to around with the United States. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And we turned it down. So that just proves that the end goal of this is regime change, and that all these little other things, like the drug boats coming out of Venezuela, the fact that he's a narco-terrorist or whatever that means, all of this is the pretext for a regime change war against Maduro in Venezuela. That's a fact. That's out in the open now, because everything the U.S. government wants, which is oil, gold, minerals, cut off ties from the rest of the world, Venezuela was willing to offer, and the administration turned it down. So that was absolutely shocking, but it's not, I shouldn't even say it's shocking. It just proves what we already knew, that this wasn't actually about drugs or anything like that, because there's no fentanyl coming from Venezuela. That's a fact. Unless they want to provide evidence for once about their claims, which is, I don't know why it's confidential to have evidence that fentanyl is coming from Venezuela. I mean, they're claiming it. They could release evidence of that, but they choose not to. And there's actually evidence to the contrary. There's leaks and claims to the contrary. So it can't be about that, because that's, at this point, for all we know, not true. So all we do know is that the United States was offered everything and turned it down. So that leads us to conclude that this is about regime change. The question now is, if this is the case, why? We are $38 trillion in debt. We are stretched across the world. We're still entangled in the Middle East, which we had one war that seems to be paused for now between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, and another war in the Middle East that seems to be potentially coming back, which is Israel and Iran, which of course we'll get dragged into, because why not? Because we do whatever Israel wants. We also have the war in Eastern Europe between Ukraine and Russia, which doesn't seem to be slowing up anytime soon. And we are looking at a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, potentially in the coming years. That, of course, the neocons all say we must defend no matter what. So, with all of this considered, is it really the best course of action to overthrow Maduro because of the feelings of Marco Rubio? Is that really the plan? What have we learned? Nothing from Afghanistan, for example? We were in Afghanistan for 20 plus years We overthrew the ragtag Taliban and left Afghanistan 20 years later with the Taliban being significantly more armed with U.S. weapons. So the war hawks who are advocating for this regime change war have already concluded that this is the easiest thing ever, and anyone against this is stupid and doesn't understand something or whatever. But this is the propaganda I'm talking about. The war hawks always have to overplay how easy this will be to sell it to you, to get you to even buy it. They have to get you to think that this will be the easiest thing in the world. And they have to dispel you of any possible questions that you may have or any doubts that you may have. But here are a couple questions I have that none of these war hawks are even going to act like they've considered. And I'm not talking about the foreign policy. I'm talking about the people who advocate for this blindly and buy the propaganda every single time. Have you considered the terrain of Venezuela? It's a mountainous terrain. Have you considered the potential of insurgencies from the drug cartels? Have you considered that at all? These are the questions that nobody ever considers. And also, have you considered the fact that you don't know everything? That our foreign policy establishment, as much as they like to brag that they're experts, have messed up time and time again, and very clearly by the evidence don't know everything. They were wrong in Iraq. They were wrong in Afghanistan. They were wrong in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen. They've been wrong in Russia and Ukraine. They've been wrong time and time again. They were wrong, of course, in Vietnam. They were wrong in all these situations, but yet we still view them as, well, they couldn't be lying to us this time. They couldn't be wrong this time because they're the experts, right? No, the experts, if we still think like that, we've learned nothing. These guys don't have your best interest at heart. These guys act in their own self-interests. And it's very possible that they are lying to you to serve their agenda. And if you can't see that by now, then you must have had blinders on through COVID, through Russiagate, through all of it. Because if you can't see that by now, then okay, whatever, do that. Okay. Some of us have paid attention to the fact that the expert class, including the foreign policy experts, lie all the time. They've lied all the time. And this is very clearly one of the most blatant examples. It's just, they're not even trying at this point. They are pushing forward without the propaganda machine. And that's what's crazy. That's probably the craziest part. Because back in the old foreign policy world, you had the mainstream media that was very ultra controlled, that the government was very capable of manipulating with false intelligence, because the government was their main source of the government's intelligence was their main source. So the government fabricated the intelligence, that's proven now. They fabricated intelligence for Iraq, and the mainstream media went along with that without questioning a thing. Now, in the modern times, whether it be for Ukraine or Israel right now, or this new war in Venezuela, you have a decentralized media with sites like antiwar.com, with sites like DropSite, with podcasts of people who are awake to everything about foreign policy and are questioning just about everything. And as soon as you question many of the narratives, like what even is a narco-terrorist, you realize very quickly, oh, that's just a propaganda term. Because in order to sell you a war, you have to make the other side look like the worst people in the history of humanity. Saddam Hussein was Hitler. Muammar Gaddafi was Hitler. Bashar al-Assad is Hitler. Putin is Hitler. Maduro is Hitler. These people are all the worst people in the history of the world, according to our establishment. Because in order to sell this war, which we don't know how it'll turn out, and very possibly could turn out bad, they have to convince you that this is an existential threat that we cannot possibly live without destroying. So this is the propaganda I'm talking about. Because as soon as you poke at the propaganda, it just all comes crumbling down. And we'll see how this ends up. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks. And it's now we've moved ships to the coast of Venezuela. We moved the USS Gerald Ford to the coast of Venezuela. And it seems as if this is just imminent at this point, where it seems like we're just weeks away from a regime change war launching in Venezuela for no reason. For no reason. Just because Rubio wants to. Rubio has an emotional attachment to seeing Maduro fall. That's the reason. That's the reason at this point. Because we were offered everything. We were offered all the oil interests and all the gold interests of Maduro in Venezuela, and we turned it down. That's a fact that we can't escape from. And if that doesn't tell you this is all about regime change, then I don't know what does. So that's where we'll end it off for today. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and go follow me on Instagram, X, and Spotify to stay updated on this war and, of course, all the rest across the world. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good day.
Americanism, not globalism.
I am not a slave. I am a free citizen.
There should be no Federal Reserve System.
Only America first.